So Star Wars Outlaws is like a 7 out of 10, right? I mean, it has pretty good fundamentals. Its representation of Star Wars is pretty good as far as modern media goes. It's not the tightest controlling, but it's serviceable. It's not 200 hours long like some of Ubisoft's other output, but it can also keep you going for 20 to 30. And while the writing isn't as good as I'd like throughout the entire runtime, I wouldn't say it's unentertaining either. So we have a kind of sloppy, kind of unpolished, but good enough entry in the pantheon of Star Wars games. I'd say anywhere from a 5, 6, 7, maybe an 8 out of 10. Let me read you some of the most recent reviews of Star Wars Outlaws on Metacritic. Windblades rates it a 0. Ubisoft games seem to be crafted by some evil woke AI. Zero soul, no fuego. Love Gaming 767 rates it a 4 out of 10. The CEO should step down and fired all of their employees so they can create a different game. Their first-person engine was really good. Their first-person engine from Avatar. This person might unironically like Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and also not like Star Wars Outlaws at the same time. You know, a 4 out of 10 is harsh, but I respect this guy. They probably have some good reviews of other games. Joe Bomb rates it a 1 out of 10, saying this game is an easy 6 to 8 out of 10. Judgment Blade rates it a 0. Jabba would be proud of Ubisoft's scammy and scummy business practices. They have locked iconic missions beyond even more overpriced versions of this e-waste. They're of course talking about the iconic mission, Jabba's Gambit, only available if you ordered the $110 plus version of the game. It features so-called iconic, genre-defining gameplay such as look for the data pad. And then it gets good after that. And then you defeat the bandits. And then wait for it. It gets really good after that. After you defeat the bandits, you escape. It's also important to note, Jabba's Gambit has no item rewards and does not increase your reputation with the cartel. It's really a shame that everyone will miss that so-called iconic experience and the many rewards that it reaps. Okay, to a certain point, I'm just memeing here. These aren't people truly trying to critically evaluate Star Wars Outlaws on neither its validity as a piece of art, nor its validity as a product. They just went on Metacritic, wrote how they felt, and clicked post. But when you're looking at a game critically, how do you rate it? I have no doubt that Windblades over here thinks that this game is legitimately a 0 out of 10. And while I could point to the thousands and thousands of eShop garbage, AI scam games, and literal child gambling sites as much better examples of a game deserving a score that low, is my view of Star Wars Outlaws as a 7 out of 10 any more objectively correct than theirs? And more importantly, when you're looking at a game made by hundreds of thousands of people, how do you balance appreciating the hours and hours and hours of work and passion that went into it versus the fact that you still gotta spend $70 to even boot it up? Let's talk about it. Hey, I'm Benny Gurkman, this is Touchpad, and today I ask the question, how can you possibly review a video game? I mean, I guess it's simple in theory, you just play the game and then write about your experience, but that's exactly what Alexis Ong did at the release of Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. She played through the expansion, curated a set of thoughts, and wrote them out fairly eloquently in a 3,000 plus word examination. It's a really good piece of writing. It's not the normal type of game review, instead choosing to bring the reader along on a series of anecdotal vignettes of her time with the DLC, and I think that actually really works with a game like Elden Ring. The best parts of the game are the little moments of discovery and victory, not necessarily the moment-to-moment walking around and fighting. So when I originally read this piece, not only did I not see it as problematic, but I saw it as a great review that took an opportunity to try out a less used format. The internet, though, did not agree with me. This piece of writing was meticulously taken down all over social media. A lot of people shrugging off any of the valid criticism by Ong in favor of the mad 'cause bad or the "aw, do you need a games journalist difficulty" talking points that are typical of modern criticism of criticism. It boiled up over a few hours and days until release, and then the game came out and hit mixed reviews on Steam. By the way, the internet dogpiled on the authors saying that they just suck at the game, despite one of the author's key complaints being the, quote, uncharacteristic, infantilizing hand-holding for encounters that should be learned through repeated failure. In some ways, she was saying the game was too easy, and people were dogging on her for, games journalist, bad at game, get good. Forgoing the fact that likely many of the people angry about this review on Twitter, Threads, YouTube, or whatever didn't really read the whole review in its entirety anyway, how can we as an industry more effectively structure criticism so that this kind of blown out of proportion hatred is less of a commonality? At least for the people that do read the whole review before responding, how can you ensure that your points and evaluations aren't misunderstood or misinterpreted by them? Well, I have a theory. Call it Benny Gurkman's 3 guiding points to modern games criticism. Let's start with number 1, and let's start it with a story. This story starts, as all good stories do, with Concord.
Do not dare! We were supposed to stick together.
Do not trust him.
Oh, where's this coming from?
I played the beta when it was free with PS Plus, and I think it was fine. It was definitely not something I was going to spend money on, at least before it shut down, but, I thought it had okay bones. The gameplay was fine, it looked like there was enough content. The biggest issue, and most obvious issue, as games pundit Kyle Bosman puts it very, very correctly, I think, was that Concord lacked charisma. There was nothing wrong with Concord, but there was nothing right either. But when you look back on it today, after Concord's spectacular monumental failure, 2 weeks just sitting at a few hundred players and then leading into being totally and completely taken offline with automatic refunds, it makes all the reviews sitting at 60 to 70 almost too positive. And yeah, I think to a certain extent, the game had okay looking art, it launched, it played well without crashing, and that deserves something, but a 70, a 75 for a game so bad it would shut down almost immediately? I think we need a way to put our thoughts into perspective here. The modern lens of AAA games criticism being stuck in the 6 to 10 range really limits what people can and can't say about a game. Every AAA game will have good art, it'll launch, it might have some bugs, but it will be playable and there will be a gameplay loop. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. But adding the hundreds of thousands of slop AI and scam games onto the same 10-point scale as 500-person teams with hundreds of millions of dollars to back them up, I don't think that's the answer. We're restricting ourselves. Shedding that restriction might end with just completely removing the necessity for a review score at all, focusing on the actual real thoughts about the experience instead, but I don't think that would ever happen. Instead, I think the answer here lies in setting expectations. Did we expect Concord to be better than any other similarly budgeted games this year? I don't think anyone expected that. But did we expect Concord to be better than Hot and Hentai? Hentai Girl's Crazy Cowgirl? Or possible Game of the Year contender I've heard, Wukong's Child Monkey King Myth? No. So why are we even considering the two on the same scale, in the same world, the same universe? I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with Kyle Bosman about this a few days ago, and he largely agrees.
And also, I think that part of a responsibility of a reviewer is to, think of the audience. Basically, because imagine somebody who's never played Call of Duty before, and then they pick up this one. They pick up the one from this year. They would say, wow, whoa, there's so much going on here. And so to that person, wow, that is a 9. I've never played a game like this before. Because they don't have those expectations that I said were universal. Yeah. What is the frame of mind of somebody? What do you think this game is going to be, and how much does it deliver upon that? 100%.
So with a game like Concord, it shouldn't be just a neutral point that the game doesn't have a particularly interesting world or character design. It should be a huge red flag, Because every other hero shooter, successful live service in MMO does have an interesting world and character design. So number 1, on Benny's games criticism guidelines, and probably the most important one out of the 3, set your expectations. This doesn't have to be a paragraph about what you want from the game, though it can be. Just ensure your audience knows on what qualities you're evaluating the game. Reviewing FC24? Easy 8 or 9 out of 10 even. But that's if you're looking at it in a bubble. If you're evaluating against the last 10 years of FIFA games, does it do anything to differentiate itself? Does it improve anything? Tell the audience that. Number 2, and I think for a large part this one comes along with number 1, you need to set clear goals for the games you're looking at. Number 1 and 2, they sound very similar, but it's not. On one hand, you have expectations, or essentially what you want from the game, what you desire in the game. On the other, you have what you might need from the game. You might walk into Silent Hill 2 Remake wanting revamped combat, great animation mixing, and stellar gunplay. But does it need that? What it needs is to be as good as its contemporaries, games like Resident Evil 2 Remake or the Alone in the Dark Remake. Give an example or two of what this kind of thing should feel like to be competitively viable on a shelf, or just competitively viable in your brain. After playing Alone in the Dark Remake, does Silent Hill 2 Remake feel better than it? Worse than it? If it does that affect your experience? Like I said, you might want Silent Hill 2 Remake to have great combat, and I think that should be mentioned if that's something you do really want and think will help the game. But you should also keep in mind if having good combat is necessary at all. Finally, number 3 is to put it into perspective. I think that having an audience that is solely yours helps a lot for this. For someone like Kyle Bosman, where people are subscribed to be subscribed to him specifically, they're probably more familiar with his views and perspectives overall. But if you're freelance writing for IGN or whatever, you might have a more general audience. And so the audience reading this piece in particular needs to know a bit of where you stand. That's where the Eurogamer article from earlier comes in. I think it would have been helped a lot by this. They do mention that they loved Elden Ring and played it at launch, but when one of their core conceits to their review is the game abandoning its oft light touch in regards to forced user iteration, instead opting for a much more direct handhold approach, they need to spend time to back that up and reason with the audience why that approach was good in the first place. If you're talking about how Shadow of the Erdtree shifting away from that is bad, you need to explain why Elden Ring having it in the first place was good, and why you're an authority on it. Okay, so that leads me to these 3 guidelines. Set expectations. What do you want from the game? Set clear goals. What does the game need? And then finally, put it into perspective. Why do you want or need those things? No matter what, these 3 things can help the audience get to the base of what you're trying to say. If you're looking at a game on a money in, time out basis, that might be a required goal for an MMO or looter shooter. But if you're reviewing Hellblade 2, The Last of Us, that's more of a personal preference than a prerequisite. If you want emotional storytelling and intelligence in your game, that's great. And it's not wrong to want that in games like Call of Duty, but understand that your expectation of good writing isn't a requirement either, and mention it both ways. No matter what way or lens you rate these games though, I think it's important for your audience to be kept up to speed with what that lens is. Because sure, you can say you're writing for a certain audience, but then what happens when your audience begins to grow, or your audience changes, or even simply, what if your audience just doesn't understand? I don't think it hurts a piece of writing, or a video, or an essay, or whatever, to be open about these things. It's more work to mention it, sure, and it's even more work to mention it in a way that feels fluent with the pace of a review or an essay, but it's exponentially valuable for increasing the level of conversation about these games, moving past the starter roadblocks of being on the same page, and more into the realm of what to put onto the next page. It's what those reviews I read at the beginning of the video are missing. I don't disagree with what those people are saying. I can't disagree. What, I'm gonna say their opinion, a thing of zero objectivity by definition, is wrong? No, but if I could even begin to understand where those opinions are coming from, I could dialogue with them in a way that's much more reasonable and productive for the future of games, and art, and media, and even society as a whole. And so, if you're wondering, where can I find an example of writing that does all of this effectively? How can I learn these skills? Don't worry, because Love Gaming 776 will clear it up for you in his review of Concord. 1 out of 10. I got shot because my character is obese. Too fat. Too many colors on the screen, especially the character. My eyes hurt. Instead, I go play Worms from World Worms Party. Better character design. No notes. Set expectations. A good game is colorful and Concord is too colorful. Set goals. The characters are obese. They gotta be skinnier. And finally, put it into perspective. Character design just isn't as good as Worms from World Worms Party. I'm Benny Gerkman. This is Touchpad. I'll see you with another episode next week for TGS.